The United States of America is well known for its 50 states and capital district of Washington, D.C. A less discussed topic, however, are the 14 overseas territories that are controlled and governed by the USA. Today, nearly 4 million people live in these U.S. overseas territories. That's equal to the populations of Maine, New Hampshire, and Rhode Island combined. Today, we'll seek to better understand where they're located, how they came to be, and how they fit into the fabric of our national identity. So to better understand the answers to these questions, we must first discuss what a territory in the United States actually is. The United States has included territories from its inception, and those people living in the territories lived knowing the Constitution protected their rights and would allow for eventual statehood, including a promise of full political participation. Apart from the original 13 colonies, every modern-day state was at one point part of a territory. However, the mindset regarding a territory's future in America began to shift near the conclusion of the 19th century. The inevitable outcome of statehood for an American territory ended when the U.S. began acquiring island territories as a result of their victory in the Spanish-American War of 1898 under President William McKinley. Given these acquisitions, the question of statehood became a hotly debated topic, which ultimately came before the highest court in America. In several fractured and contested Supreme Court decisions, called the Insular Cases, the Supreme Court created a category of unincorporated territories, labeling these island territories as places under U.S. control that were not on the path to statehood, and whose residents would be denied basic constitutional rights. The language of the court regarding the people living in these so-called unincorporated territories described them as half-civilized, savage, ignorant and lawless, and alien races. The language used here by the court largely mirrors the language used to justify the seizure of Native American land for centuries prior. Many of the same justices who ruled on the Insular Cases also ruled on the infamous Plessy v. Ferguson case that established a legal basis for, quote, separate but equal segregation in the South. As a result of the Insular Cases, the U.S. territories have been essentially stuck in a near-permanent colonial status for over a century. These decisions laid the groundwork for these territories to be more or less excluded when discussing what was and wasn't part of America, even though these lands fell under the jurisdiction of the Constitution. The bombings of Pearl Harbor give a notable example. In 1941, the U.S. had control over the territory of the Philippines, which lasted from 1898 until 1946. The Filipino people were considered U.S. nationals at that time. When the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor in Hawaii on December 7th, they also bombed the Philippines and the U.S. territories of Guam, Midway Island, and Wake Island. But this wasn't how the then president portrayed the bombings. The 16 million people living in the Philippines looked to President Franklin Delano Roosevelt for guidance as the air raids persisted for far longer than in Pearl Harbor. However, FDR described the attack as being upon Hawaii, censoring references to the Philippines in his final draft of his speech. He believed that the Philippines and Guam seemed foreign to many, despite being, at that time, U.S. territories, just like Hawaii. FDR described the bombings as happening on the American island of Oahu, referencing the damage to American naval and military forces, and the very many American lives lost. While this was all still true, by the end of World War II, about 1 million U.S. nationals were killed in America's Pacific colonies. It's also worth noting how these territories have been portrayed to the public throughout history. For example, in the century preceding 1940, the United States claimed almost 100 uninhabited islands in the Caribbean and the Pacific. In the 1940s, 22 islands appeared in official tallies, whether through the census or governmental reports. But despite the vast American control over many island territories for centuries, U.S. maps have historically showed a very limited view of the country. Many U.S. mainlanders grew confused about the breadth of the United States, and many didn't realize that the United States had an empire of its own, just like the British. But regardless of how territories have been presented, they are still in fact part of the United States. So by now you may be wondering, what exactly are the differences between territories and states? Well, to understand this, let's first look at what a state itself is. While U.S. citizens in these states and territories are afforded federal protections from the U.S. government, states offer greater degrees of rights and representation given their sovereign status. Each state is a self-governing entity and has broad authority to govern within its borders. States are entitled to self-government with a governor, state legislature, state court system, and representatives from the state within the federal government. The United States Constitution defines states throughout its articles, but the 10th Amendment is where state sovereignty is displayed. The idea of state sovereignty emerged from the 13 original American colonies, however, as each colony was declared to have a sovereign government after overthrowing English colonial rule. At this point, you might ask, what powers can a state enjoy? Under our democratic federalist system created by the Constitution, states can form elected governments to write and enforce laws within their borders, so long as the laws conform to the rights enumerated in the Constitution. In addition to having a governor, legislature, and a state supreme and lower courts, each state also has a part-time militia controlled by the governor, called the National Guard. Citizens of each state can vote to send 2 members of the U.S. Senate, at least 1 representative for the House of Representatives, and a variable number of electors to the Presidential Electoral College. So with all that in mind, what then is a territory? All U.S. land that is not part of a state is considered a U.S. territory. These territories are directly controlled by the federal U.S. government, but territories are permitted to establish their own territorial governments in order to govern local affairs, though this power is far more limited than in state governments. The chief minister of a territorial government is usually called a governor. According to the Constitution, territories are under the sovereign control of the U.S. Congress. The Constitution states that Congress has, quote, the power to dispose of and make all needful rules and regulations respecting the territory and other property belonging to the United States. Even with this language in the Constitution, which many refer to as the law of the land, territorial governments do have a considerable amount of control. Between 1901 and 1905, a series of U.S. Supreme Court rulings held that for practical purposes, territories and their governments have a wide latitude in setting the law and regulations for the people who live there. There are 14 U.S. territories in total not claimed by any of the 50 United States of America. 9 of the 14 are uninhabited, including Baker, Howland, Jarvis, Midway, Palmyra, and Wake Islands, all located in the Oceania region of the Pacific Ocean. Wake Island, as you can see here, is located between the Northern Mariana Islands and Hawaii and houses 150 U.S. Air Force personnel. Other uninhabited territories under U.S. control include Johnston Atoll in the Oceania region between Hawaii and Australia, Kingman Reef, which, as you can see, is not far from Johnston Atoll, and Navassa Island, located 30 miles west of Haiti in the Caribbean. These are collectively known as the Minor Outlying Islands. Beyond these 9 relatively uninhabited territories, there are 5 territories that are home to many permanent residents who are U.S. citizens: Puerto Rico, the U.S. Virgin Islands, the Northern Mariana Islands, Guam, and the American Samoa. Each of the American territories has a different level of autonomy, but all are ultimately subject to the United States government and U.S. federal law. The U.S. territories all have unique histories and play an important, yet often underlooked, role in American culture and governance. The territories are the home of over 100,000 veterans. Each inhabited territory elects a non-voting member of the House of Representatives, but has no representation in the Senate. Citizens in these territories do vote in presidential primary elections, but have no representation within the Electoral College, so these votes are more symbolic than anything. Some people criticize the unequal status and representation of people living in U.S. territories as colonial and unjust, a form of taxation without representation that initially led the U.S. colonies to rebel from Great Britain. U.S. citizens in territories do not pay federal income taxes, but they do pay some federal taxes and do not have a say in how their tax money is spent. One question that might come up is, what about Washington, D.C.? Well, Washington, D.C. is not considered a territory, but instead a district. It has more autonomy than the territories. Its citizens are not represented in the same way as those states, but D.C.-based citizens pay federal income tax and are represented in the Electoral College due to the 23rd Amendment. D.C. has the same number of electoral votes to the least populous state, currently Vermont and Wyoming. However, Washington, D.C. has a non-voting delegate in the House and has no senators, much like the U.S. territories. You might be wondering at this point, how are the territories similar to the 50 states of the U.S.? Much of the similarities are related to how states and territories relate to and benefit the federal government. Both states and territories are part of the United States. People born in either are usually considered citizens of the United States by birth. In both states and territories, citizens can serve as military personnel, and men between the ages of 18 and 25 must register for the Selective Service of the Department of Defense. There are also some key differences between states and territories. Territory citizens, unlike state citizens, do not have meaningful votes for representatives and electors. Territory citizens also do not pay a federal income tax, despite paying Social Security taxes and many other federal taxes that state citizens do pay. However, territorial citizens who would otherwise be eligible are denied supplemental security income, leaving people with disabilities and aging adults without support from the federal government. Other federal programs like Medicaid, the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, also known as SNAP or food stamps, child tax credits, and the Earned Income Tax credits are either capped or denied to territorial citizens. All 5 of the populated U.S. territories have a lower per capita income than the average per capita income of the 50 U.S. states and the District of Columbia. When Hurricanes Irma and Maria hit Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands in 2017, over 3,000 people died, with the overwhelming majority occurring after the storms had passed because the federal government failed to act sufficiently to aid these territories. The coronavirus pandemic also showed healthcare disparities quite clearly between states and territories. Advocates and representatives of the U.S. territories claim that the lack of equal representation and voting power is directly correlated with the poverty seen in these places. Americans living in U.S. territories are generally thought to be last in line for hurricane relief, COVID-19 aid funding, healthcare, education, and much more. The Department of the Interior is the primary federal agency that handles federal affairs with territories, acting as the main representation of territory citizens in the United States. The territories all have their own governments and are autonomous in many ways, but they do not share sovereignty with the federal government like the states do. The U.S. federal government can exploit, conserve, manage, and explore its territories as it wishes. So let's take a closer look at each of the 14 U.S. territories, beginning with the uninhabited ones. The United States controls a number of minor outlying islands known for being uninhabited. Many of these islands were acquired in the 1850s, including Howland Island, Jarvis Island, Johnston Atoll, and Navassa Island. Kingman Reef was acquired shortly after, in 1860, followed by Midway Atoll in 1867. Palmyra Atoll and Wake Island were acquired by the United States in 1898 and 1899, respectively. So what are the minor outlying islands and what are they like? Baker Island is an inhabited island in the central Pacific, as you can see here on the map. What you can't tell from a map alone is that Baker Island is actually a low-lying atoll, with the highest point being 26 feet above sea level. Not only that, but the island includes sandy beaches and coral reefs. Right near Baker Island is Howland Island, which has no permanent population or economic activity, but it is known for its proximity to Amelia Earhart's tragic, failed attempt to circumnavigate the world by airplane in 1937. Howland Island is a U.S. National Wildlife Refuge and part of the Pacific Remote Islands Marine National Monument, too. Palmyra Atoll is based near Hawaii and, like Howland Island, hosts a significant biodiversity. The island is home to hundreds of species of fish and coral and has a unique geography of coral reefs, lagoons, sandbars, and islets. The island is mostly used by scientists. Jarvis Island, found in the South Pacific, is administered by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service as part of the National Wildlife Refuge System. The island has no permanent inhabitants or visitors, but hosts visiting scientific researchers to study birds, crustaceans, turtles, sharks, and coral reefs. Johnston Atoll, based in the North Pacific, is located southwest of Honolulu, Hawaii. It's considered one of the most isolated places on Earth, consisting of 4 small islands called Johnston Island, Sand Island, Akau Island, and Hikina Island. Johnston Atoll used to be a refueling station for flights from Hawaii across the Pacific Ocean and was a military base during and after World War II. Now, the atoll is administered by U.S. Fish and Wildlife as part of the Pacific Remote Islands Marine National Monument. Kingman Reef was annexed as part of the Hawaiian Islands in 1922, but is now considered part of the U.S. Minor Outlying Islands. The territory is primarily made of submerged reeds and sandbanks, consisting of a total area of 7 acres. Midway Atoll is also close to Hawaii and homes only 40 inhabitants. Its 2 coral islands, Sand and Eastern Island, form the Midway Atoll National Wildlife Refuge. The refuge consists of nearly 600,000 acres and is one of the largest natural wildlife refuges on Earth, with millions of seabirds using its shores and waters as habitat. The area is also home to many species of endangered monk seals, ducks, and aquatic animals. Navassa Island, which is located between Haiti and Jamaica in the Caribbean, was originally controlled by Spain until 1801. Later, in 1857, the island was claimed by the U.S. It's now managed as part of the Caribbean National Wildlife Refuge System. Wake Island, a coral island in the North Pacific Ocean between the Marshall Islands and Guam, is the final minor outlying island on the list. Wake Island was attacked only hours after the attack on Pearl Harbor by Japan. Japanese forces occupied the territory until 1945, when the U.S. liberated the island after fighting, bearing many casualties to bring Wake Island under its control. Beyond the 14 territories we've discussed so far, it's worth noting that several more territories are disputed former territories. Bajo Nuevo Bank, an uninhabited territory claimed by the U.S. in 1879, is one such territory. The U.S. ceded Bajo Nuevo Bank to Colombia in 1972. The territory was also claimed by Honduras, Jamaica, and Nicaragua. The Corn Islands, as you can see here, make up another former U.S. territory that the country leased from Nicaragua in 1914 and ceded back to Nicaragua in 1970. Roncador Bank is another of the U.S.'s former territories. It is uninhabited and was claimed by the U.S. way back in 1856, but eventually was surrendered over 100 years later to Colombia in 1981. Another uninhabited former territory of the United States is called Serranilla Bank. This territory was claimed by the United States in 1879 and was eventually relinquished to Colombia in 1972. Serranilla Bank was also claimed by Nicaragua, Honduras, and possibly Jamaica, though this is uncertain. The Swan Islands make up another relatively uninhabited former territory that was claimed by American forces in 1856. There is now a Honduran naval base on the islands after the U.S. ceded the Swan Islands to Honduras in 1972. Puerto Rico. One of the most famous U.S. territories is Puerto Rico, located in the Caribbean. As the most populous U.S. territory, the territory is home to more than 3.3 million people who are all natural-born U.S. citizens. Puerto Rico was acquired in 1899 and consists of a large main island and several smaller islands, including Culebra, Mona, and Vieques. Puerto Rico combines indigenous Taíno traditions with cultural aspects of Spain and other parts of the world. Some American territories, like Puerto Rico, were meant to serve as labs for experiments done by the mainlanders. Dr. Cornelius Rhodes, for example, went to Puerto Rico to try to induce diseases in patients just to see how they fared, and intentionally did not treat his patients. Rhodes reportedly wrote a letter in which he claimed to have murdered multiple patients of his and attempted to murder even more, which became a big scandal in Puerto Rico. He retreated to New York without any consequences, trial, or loss of his job. Rhodes actually was promoted within the medical establishment and became a founder of chemotherapy, receiving rewards for his work, as most people from the mainland never learned of the horrors Rhodes inflicted upon Puerto Rican people. For hundreds of years, the people living in the territory of Puerto Rico have fought to decolonize their land. Disputes over whether statehood, enhanced Commonwealth status, or independence would be best suited to overtake the colonial history of the United States are still divisive to this day. In November of 2020, 53% of Puerto Ricans who voted favored statehood in a non-binding referendum, but only 55% voted in the referendum. The over 3 million people living in Puerto Rico are allowed to move freely between the island and the mainland U.S. The U.S. Virgin Islands, located in the Caribbean, not far from North America, make up another prominent U.S. territory. The U.S. Virgin Islands were acquired by the United States in 1917. Over 87,000 people live in the Virgin Islands, and those born here are considered U.S. citizens. The U.S. Virgin Islands is made up of 3 main islands and a number of smaller ones. The largest, St. Croix, includes a number of popular attractions like Turtle Beach, which has beautiful, clear waters and white sand beaches. Turtle Beach also has a lively music scene where many local artists perform traditional calypso music. The Commonwealth of the Northern Mariana Islands is known as another of the 14 U.S. territories and is among the 5 inhabited territories of the United States. The acquisition of this territory happened much more recently, in 1986. The over 57,000 residents of these islands are considered U.S. citizens by birth and live on an archipelago of 14 islands in the Pacific between Japan and the Philippines. The Northern Mariana Islands are home to a very diverse population, including indigenous Chamorro, Chinese, Korean, Japanese, and Filipino people. In 2018, the Northern Marianas faced Typhoon Yutu, which received little national attention despite its catastrophic effects. Guam, located in the Oceania region, is yet another of the well-known inhabited U.S. territories. Guam is home to over 170,000 people, and its residents are citizens by birth. The U.S. acquired Guam after its victory in the Spanish-American War. It's a major tourist hub known for unique cultural traditions that blend Chamorro customs with Latin American and Spanish traditions. Guam itself is a popular tourist destination as well. Also in the Oceania region, as part of Polynesia, the American Samoa is the last of the 5 inhabited territories of the United States. The nearly 50,000 people living in American Samoa territory are not born U.S. citizens and instead as U.S. nationals. Acquired in 1900, American Samoa consists of 5 volcanic islands and 2 coral atolls, which are ring-shaped reefs, islands, or chains of islands formed out of coral. Most people living in American Samoa have native Samoan ancestry, and the territory is known for its traditional music, dance, art, language, and food. Now, given that there are notable populations living in several of the U.S. territories, many have argued that these populations of U.S. citizens should be given a path of statehood. So, what are some of the arguments for this, and what would need to happen for them to become proper states? The core argument for statehood is centered around the right to representation by and for the people, a central aspect of the American democracy system. Residents of Puerto Rico and other inhabited territories do not have the same rights as states-based citizens. Many people have advocated that centering the voices of those who have for a long time been considered second-class citizens is essential to live up to the values of American democracy. In fact, over 3.5 million Americans are denied the right to vote in presidential elections solely because of their residence in U.S. territories. In these territories, more than 98% of residents are racial or ethnic minorities, which pro-statehood advocates claim is a form of continuing disenfranchisement that systematically silences the voices of people of color. It's very possible under the U.S. Constitution and government system to turn territories into states. All the United States except the original 13 colonies were first American territories before becoming states. Statehood that was granted under the admissions clause of the U.S. Constitution. In fact, just over 60 years ago, Hawaii and Alaska were granted statehood. First, citizens of the territory must affirm by popular vote that they wish to join the U.S. as a state. A bill would need to be introduced and passed in both the House of Representatives and the Senate. The president would also have to sign the bill into law. Given the partisan conflicts within Congress currently, such a bill would likely face some barriers to being passed. If the territories or Washington, D.C. were to be admitted as states, they would enjoy all the benefits of statehood, including representation in Congress and the Electoral College. Congress would have 2 new senators added from each new state, and either seats in the House of Representatives would need to be rearranged or increased. For the first time, the citizens living in territories would have a real voice in our government. Pushes for statehood in Washington, D.C. have been introduced for decades. D.C.'s lack of statehood has recently posed serious challenges for citizens of the district. When a riot broke out at the U.S. Capitol on January 6, 2021, President Trump initially refused to activate the D.C. National Guard. State governors can mobilize their National Guard units, but the D.C. mayor, which is the closest D.C. has to a governor, requires federal authorization to dispatch the National Guard. The handling of the Capitol riots prompted renewed calls for statehood in Washington, D.C. These calls for statehood are also significant within territories, especially in Puerto Rico. The recent disasters in Puerto Rico, including Hurricane Maria of 2017, was met with a grossly inefficient and slow federal government response. For over 3 years, people in Puerto Rico had no electricity despite the billions of dollars of taxes that Puerto Rico pays to the federal government. Many people have called for statehood or independence, as the U.S. government's failure seriously impacted the people of Puerto Rico and their safety. It can be hard to reconcile the U.S. possession of territories with the ideals of democracy and freedom supposedly championed by our founding fathers. Legally, under the Constitution, a territory is just land belonging to the United States, with no sovereignty, powers, or rights of its own. Territories are thought of as possessions of the U.S., a lasting effect of American expansionism. What do you think should be in store for the future of U.S. territories? Is the possession of territories even compatible with the founding tenets of our nation? Let us know in the comments. And if you thought this video was interesting, consider watching Why the United States and Canada Have the Weirdest Border in the World, or another on the real reason why the United States bought Alaska from Russia. Thanks for watching.